Today I wanted to talk about financing a Lotus Elise. This is something that's come up and a few of you have asked about it, so I thought I would talk about it a little bit. I know there are a lot of people out there who think that you shouldn't buy anything that you can't pay cash for up front, but personally I don't think that dropping 30 grand, 40 grand of liquid cash, even if you have it, just into a car is a great idea if you're able to finance it at a low rate. If you've never tried financing an older car, you may be surprised to find out that, generally speaking, banks do not like to finance vehicles that are more than 10 years old. This is something that I never really thought about too much before I started looking at an lease. Before that, every time I was looking at buying a car, it was something that was quite a bit newer, and so it never really entered my thinking that it could be challenging to finance an older vehicle. And it's funny, while we don't think of the Elise as an old vehicle, the first ones that you can buy from the US, and most of the cars available here, are from 2005, which makes them 12 to 13 years old, depending on when you're watching this. And so financing an Elise can be a difficult proposition sometimes. So when I started researching this last year when I was buying my Elise, one of the reasons that I decided to buy a 2007 model, aside from some of the upgrades that it has over the earlier cars, is that it was easier to finance. The bank that I was working with at the time really only wanted to finance things that were 10 years old or newer. And so when I was looking around, I was looking for a 2007 or newer. And finding an Elise is hard enough, let alone a 2007 or newer that's in your price range and meets other requirements that you might have. So if you're looking to finance through a traditional bank or going through the dealer that owns the car, you may be surprised to find out pretty quick that even if you have pretty excellent credit, there's a good chance that the banks that the dealer uses or the bank that you use just simply won't finance a car that is more than 10 years old. It won't matter what your down payment is, they're just not going to finance the car. However, while big banks won't typically do this, this is sort of an area where credit unions very specifically serve this market. Credit unions work a little bit differently than banks because they are typically owned by the account holders and are set up as sort of co-ops. And so they have sort of a different mentality when it comes to financial instruments. Two of the most popular credit unions, and ones that you should look at if you're wanting to finance a Lotus that is more than 10 years old, or any car that's more than 10 years old, are PenFed and DCU. PenFed very specifically is very good about financing cars that are more than 10 years old. They'll do just about any car, so long as the loan is for less than $100,000, and I think there are some limits on the loan term. But they'll give you a regular auto financing rate, which is right now is in the upper 2% range if you have a good credit score. If you watch Doug DeMuro's channel, he often talks about that, and I think even Rob Freddy over at Super Speeders just mentioned PenFed a few times as well. They really are one of the best places to look for an auto loan if you're looking at buying a car that is 10 years or older, and new cars too. I have a PenFed load on my daily driver, a Fiat 500, and working with them was incredibly easy, and they made the whole process very simple, and their interest rates are great. So it's a really great choice to look at. You also want to look at DCU if the car is 10 years old or newer. I think they will do cars that are older than that, but it may be a little tougher than PenFed. If neither of those credit unions are options for you, you may want to start looking at credit unions that are in your local area, because the alternatives to financing without an actual car loan, you tend to be looking at personal loans, which are quite a bit harder to qualify for at most banks and credit unions. And the interest rates tend to not be very good. They're in the 8 to 9 to 10% range, kind of starting out, which is really too high if you're financing most of a car on it. If you're just financing a little bit, I guess, it's all right. But if you're financing the entire purchase price of a vehicle, paying 10% would really hurt. And in case you're wondering, PenFed is not sponsoring this video. I have no connection with them other than the fact that I am a customer and I've really liked working with them. But they don't even hold the note on my Elise, they hold it on my Fiat. So, and I know that people have a lot of different opinions on financing, and that's totally fine. I'm not of the opinion that, you shouldn't buy a car unless you have all of the cash up front for it. I also kind of think that I would rather have liquid cash than this video is not about trying to sell one sort of financial philosophy over the other. I think of all the vehicles that you could finance, the Elise is actually a pretty good choice. And the Elise is definitely worth a little bit of money paid out in the form of interest in exchange for having the car and being able to drive it. It's just too much fun. So should you finance an Elise? If it's the only way you can own the car and you can get a good interest rate, you should absolutely finance the Elise. It's one of the slowest appreciating cars that you can possibly buy. And so if you can get a rate that's in the 3% range or so, there's really no reason not to finance the car. And so how much do I pay each month for my Elise? So I bought this car and financed it through DCU and financed most of the car. The rate that I was able to get was 1.9%, like I mentioned in another video. It's pretty hard to get a rate that low now since Fed rates have gone up a little bit in the last couple of years. I financed the car for 6 years, and I financed a little over $36,000. I can't remember exactly what the amount was. The car payment on the Elise is $569 a month. Which is by far the most I've ever paid per month for a car. But interestingly enough, it doesn't feel like a car payment in the same way it feels to have a car payment on my Fiat or the lease payment on my fiance's Prius. There's something different about financing a car that is, at least to me, that is a special car and one that I really hope I can keep forever. I have a lot of aspirations for other vehicles, but the Elise fills a spot in sort of the family of cars that you might want to have that really, you can't replace it with anything else. There's just nothing quite like an Elise, and so there's always a reason to have one. It's really just going to come down to whether or not I have enough space or money to have all of the cars that I hope to have over time. But there's something about a car that is special, that are almost like a savings account. It's not really appreciating, but it's not depreciating. And so you could always pull your money out of it if you want to without really losing anything. And I have a hard time just saving money otherwise. So it's actually not the worst thing in the world for me to be putting it into something like this that is at least going to hold its value and not evaporate. Let's say you are the kind of person who wants to wait and save up and be able to buy the entire car all at once. That's great, but I do think there's something to be said for the fact that you are also kind of missing out on a lot. Sure, paying interest sucks, but life is not all about money either. And life is short and it comes and goes quickly. And I know you're not subscribing to my channel in order to hear all my thoughts or philosophies, but I think when it comes to sports cars, it's hard to avoid that topic a little bit, since these are, for the most part, expenses that are outside of what's necessary just to live, and a lot of people have a hard time just making their regular ends meet, and I'm certainly sensitive to that. I've been through a lot of financial ups and downs myself, and frankly the Elise was sort of a gift to myself after coming out of a really tough financial situation and things started looking up. I mean, the sensible thing for me to have done would have been to just keep saving money and not take on the obligation of this Elise. I mean, that would be the far more sensible thing to do. And yet, there's never a moment that goes by that I regret buying this car. It's more like I feel kind of bad for people who, I don't know, won't just say screw it, let's just let's do something silly. I don't have to have this car. I mean, it's not something I have to have if things or didn't work out, or I couldn't afford it, like I could get rid of the car and then in a few years get another one or get something else that's fun. So, I think we all have this idea that we should set ourselves up financially in this very perfect way that we'll have this very linear path towards death. And by taking on, by paying a little bit of interest, I am able to go on trips in a car like this, just enjoy a car like this, just on its own merits, just straight up enjoy driving it, because it's for nothing else. This car is not meant to do anything else other than just be driven and enjoyed. Really think twice about whether or not you want to be the kind of person who lives their life between, interest rates and makes decisions based on that only. I mean, it's, life is really not about money. We don't want to be stupid with it, but we don't want to be just totally, making every decision based on just what's the best financial choice. I guess it should also be said that, life is not about sports cars either. But I think it's better if it's about sports cars than just money. Maybe it should be about sports cars, I don't know. There are a lot worse things that it can be about. I mean, I never really thought about what would it be like to own a purpose-built sports car that I only have as sort of a weekend kind of toy, and I always thought that maybe that was, I don't know, sort of frivolous, and maybe it was a better idea to just have, a really good daily. But I've changed my mind on that after owning this car and seeing why having something that only exists for fun, and kind of how great that is, especially when we live in a pretty serious world and we're all driven to always make the best choices all the time. And I don't know where fun factors into that, but I think that when you look at financial planning or how you're supposed to plot out your life and things like that, it's like people I know who are really great at that are also very often bored out of their minds. And I think that there's got to be a way to have sort of a happy medium there where, you're not stupid, but you're not doing everything so by the book that you're just setting yourself up to you're setting yourself up to die. And I have friends that are my age or younger that act much older. I don't know. I don't see the appeal in rushing to get old. It just doesn't really compute to me, and there's something really great about doing things that other people don't do. Every once in a while I drive the Elise to work, and on the way home I'm on the Mass Pike with everybody else, in traffic on the way to get home, which is not the best place for the Elise. It wants to do other kinds of driving, curvy road kind of driving. However, there's something to be said about the choice that you make when you're on the highway and everyone else is in stop and go in their boring Camry or minivan or whatever it is, and every single person turns their head and is looking at you when you go by in something like an Elise or any really cool sports car. And I think there's I don't know what's in their heads, but I know when before I owned a car like this, and I would see people drive by in Ferraris, or the one time I saw a Lotus at the gas station or whatever, it's like the thing that sort of you can't help but have pop in your head is, what is that person doing? Or that person must have, be a little more interesting or have a more interesting life, or what have they done in order to get to that point? And I can say that it's a lot more fun and interesting to be that person than it is to just sit and wonder why, what are they doing? It might take doing things that are a little outside of your comfort zone, but I think that's it's a far more interesting thing to do, is to push yourself and do something that's a little bit nuts or a little bit weird or crazy, and not be like